Today's session is part of a wider webinar assessment series. So today's one is particularly about testing quizzes and the settings that you would use perhaps for like a class test or a final exam. And then if you're interested in randomization of questions and creating question pools, that is a different session which will happen next week, Tuesday. So we've split the sessions up in a way that we can spend more time on specific topics. If you want to know how to improve how you write multiple choice questions, then tomorrow's session will be great for you, or next week's session, which is health sciences based. So I'll share these slides before the end of the session today. So in terms of what will be covered in today's webinar, I will just go through some slides and screenshots for considerations for your test, and then Lubabala will do a demo version of the topics I went through. So most commonly, the two tools used for an online or remote exam would be the Vula test and quizzes tool or the assignments tool. Yesterday, Shanali presented on the assignments tool. And if you want access to the recording, we could probably share that. And today specifically on test and quizzes. I do want you to know that the one bigger difference between test and quizzes and short assignments is that if you are doing any sort of question that is written or short answer question or an essay, then please know that testing quizzes does not use Turnitin. So those short answer questions are not checked for plagiarism, whereas in assignments they are. And that may be one deciding factor when deciding which tool to use for your essay or short answer type questions. So today we're going to be focusing on the test and quizzes tool. If some of you here have never used test and quizzes, we're not going to go through all the basics of it, but we do have some recordings that we can share, or you can book a consultation to go through that. Today is specifically more about the settings for the testing period that is coming up. So this is the test and quizzes tool. You'd access it through your left-hand navigation bar. And this would be where you would add assessments through the add button on test and quizzes. There are two ways that you can author your assessment, and that is through creating the questions from scratch on Vula or uploading a document using markup text. So there are many people who use markup text because it's easier to upload bulk assessments versus authoring each question one by one on Vula. Lubabala will give us a short demo of each method. But before that, this is a little bit of a the question types that you will have on Vula that you can select with your test and quizzes tool. On the right-hand side here, the list that you can use for your exam. And then in terms of question authoring, so if you were to create your multiple choice question on Vula, this is what you would see on the left-hand side. You'd have to put in your question and your correct answers, sort of one by one and in lots of different text boxes, and it will display to the student with the view on the right. But the other way that you can add questions to Vula is through markup text. So with this slide, you can see that you would select create using markup text for how you add your assessment. And on the right-hand side is it's a plain text document that includes your multiple choice questions and the answers. So this is a much faster process than the prior method. But please know that if you use markup, only certain types of questions can be used. So your multiple choice questions, your true and false questions, fill in the blank and short answer questions. I don't know if any of you have used the markup method before, and maybe you want to add in the chat how that went for you. And then if you have not used it, would you be interested in using this method? Just in the chat. Yeah, so those are two authoring methods, which we'll go through in the demo. And this is just another screenshot in terms of creating the questions via the text markup. So once you add your questions through the document that you upload, you'll have an option to create a once-off assessment from it, or to create or to add these questions to a question pool or a question bank. So if you're really interested in question pools or question banks, then definitely come to next week Tuesday's session, which will be run by Thomas and Lubabalo. Okay, so I see there is a question about markup text. We'll come to that later when we do the demo, but I'm glad to see that people are interested. I do think it's a much faster method to add your questions to Vula. So that is one nice tip for optimizing your testing quizzes. I'm going to go straight into sort of best practices or settings for testing quizzes. So I have assumed that you have some familiarity with the testing quizzes tool. So yeah. So for people who want to add images to their questions, so you might want to add an image that people have to analyze or look at with their question, or you may want to add images to your answer options. So the recommendation with that is to use the attachment function on Vula to add your image. So if I go to the next slide, where is my slide? Sorry, it was in the wrong order. If I go to one slide ahead of that, when you are creating your question on the left-hand side, there is a little section called attachments. So you would upload your image there, preferably in the JPEG format. And even though you are adding it as an attachment, the student doesn't see it in that way. They will see it as the image is loaded already, like the view on the right. So that is a good tip to know when you're adding images to your questions. Please don't use the copy-paste version of images, because there might be a small risk that the image is not displayed. So that's a sort of a tip for if you are using attachments to your images. If you have any questions about your methodology of using images or attachments, then you can email help@Vula and they'll help you find a solution. If you're adding images as choices, as answer options, then we recommend that you actually create a folder on Vula, upload all your images there, and then hide that folder from the students, but you will use that those images in that folder for your answer options. So another cool thing that Testing Quizzes has is extra credit. So if you want to have a bonus question on your quiz, you could choose the extra credit button on your question. This is not available for all question types, so this is available definitely on your multiple choice question, but might be on others as well if you want to offer any sort of bonus mark or extra credit. Deadlines. So this is quite a big one for your test or exam. And I don't have answers for you, but I have maybe things you want to think about. So, and any of the other salters, feel free to hop in or Lubabalo on this specific slide. But one, you need to think about your window period for your assessment. Will it be available Monday to Wednesday or will it just be available on Wednesday at a specific time? And that is something you need to consider. Some people have opted to leave it open for a day or two to allow for people who might have connectivity issues or access issues. If you have done this already for your course, either earlier this semester or in June, and you have a tip about that, I think feel free to pop that in the chat. Another thing you want to consider, are you timing your quiz? So will it be 60 minutes or 2 hours? And do your students have prior experience in your course with using timed tests? So if you've run a few quizzes in your course so far and none of those were timed, it might be a little bit of a shock to them if they suddenly have a timed assessment. So it's always good to have, for your students to have like prior exposure to some of the assessment techniques or methods that you have used. In terms of, there's another function called auto submit. So if your students run out of time in a timed quiz, the Vula will auto submit their quiz to Vula. I see Chris has a comment about auto submit.
Thanks.
Okay, so
I've used it in a test and it bit me because students went out having done the test, then decided, oh, they'll pop back and see if they can change something, whatever. then discovered they couldn't, but the auto submit automatically then uploads a blank answer to every question. And then when the tutors mark it, they give 0. So the auto submit does seem to bite sometimes.
Hi, maybe I can just talk to that point. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Sam.
Okay. So yes, auto submit is sometimes yeah, it does have those unexpected consequences, but okay. So it depends on how you've also set it up with regards to grade books. I'm just going to close the door. It's a bit noisy. It depends on how you set it up with gradebook. So you can send the highest score from gradebook. So there would be multiple submissions. Otherwise, you'd also, if it's short questions, then you might need to just be cautious of that. But auto submit is nice because sometimes students don't press submit at the end, and then their submission will never come through to you. So that's what the auto submit essentially does. So you could do it retrospectively. It's not to say you can't do it later on, but it's just a nice thing. And specifically, if you only have one submission, it helps a lot. Okay, hope that helps.
Well, thanks, Sam. Maybe we can add more detailed notes on how the auto submission works, so that people understand what could or may happen and what is the best practice for using that.
Sure.
Thank you. I hope that helps, Chris, for now. And then another thing to think about is your time zone, and if students are based in any other locations during this period, and how to cater for that. So you might, for example, give them an exception. I don't know if, Sam, you want to try Shanali's question in the chat. It sounds like auto submit plus resubmit is dangerous.
I wouldn't call it dangerous. I would call it more like you just need to be aware of that. So if you have a gradebook, if you have, say, MCQs, and you just enable gradebook to send the highest score through, there will be effectively no, let's say, no like consequence from the student experience or from your side. So if you allow someone to attempt a quiz 5 times or unlimited times, and it just sends the highest score through and it's auto submits, yeah, I think that's fine.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I think, Chris, if you have any further maybe questions, like then we can send it through to help at Vula. Engineering calculations, yeah, it's definitely hard. So moving on, this is what the deadlines screen looks like. So Lubabala will go through this with us, but if you are maybe in a test or exam scenario, you'd probably only have one submission for your student. You decide when the window period you want it, when it's available and when it's due. If you have a time limit, you'll put that in. In terms of late submissions, you probably wouldn't have a late submission for a class test or an exam. And this is the auto submit function I was talking about after a student has saved their work. Those are the main settings that you need to think about for your test. Cool. Exceptions. So if you have students that require extra time, possibly, I'm not sure what other exceptions might exist. If you have a student or a group of students that require extra time, you can add that to your quiz beforehand. Also, there has been a case in terms of, and Lubabala, you can add here if you want to, there has been a case where someone has decided to test different groups of students at different times. So maybe group A goes at 8 to 10 o'clock and group B goes to 10 to 12 p.m. And you can set those exceptions up in your quiz before you publish. Oh, and then Sam's adding there in the chat that exceptions for different time zones too. Yeah, and then Chris is also adding that there's a common exception for students who cannot access the test during the scheduled slot. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Lubabala. I see as a question about time limit. If my test has a time limit and one student has technical difficulties during the test, can I adjust the time for that one student when the test is live? Lubabalo or Sam, do you maybe want to answer that one?
Thanks, Jasmine. From Louis, it's quite, how can I put it? It's quite tricky, especially when the student is already live on the assessment. I think you can set the exception, but they would have to exit the system. So they would have to log out. You set the exception, then they log in again, and that should kick in. But it's quite tricky, I would say. There's also an option where if a student had issues with the assessment and they ran out of time, the exceptions would not work. So you can then allow the student to resubmit or to retake the assessment. Yeah.
Cool. We maybe need that written up as well. We probably do have somewhere, maybe you can add that to the slide. This is just another screenshot version of the exceptions if you haven't seen it before. So for example, if I want to give an exception for me and I wanted some extra time, 20 minutes extra, you could do that over here. If the only thing you're doing is giving a student extra time, then you don't need to complete the dates that it's due or available, because it'll take the original assignment date. So this is all you have to do is just for like 15 minutes or 20 minutes extra. And then if you have groups set up beforehand and maybe you have a group of students that require 20 minutes extra, then you could do that as well. And as Chris said, you could do it for time zones and for people, or sorry, as Sam said, and then Chris said that you can do it for people who can't make it during the scheduled slot. So I guess when you set up your quiz and your exam, you could ask students if they have any issues with that date or if they have extra time. Another thing that you need to think about is the layout and appearance of your quiz. So you will need to decide whether students can go back and forth between a question. So if this was a traditional face-to-face exam, people could often skip a question and then turn their page back to the question once they have time at the end of the quiz. So you can think about whether you want that option. If your quizzes so far have not opted to use linear access, they might be a little bit shocked when they're in a class test or an exam and they see it for the first time, because I mean, I think with student behavior, often they come back to questions that they can't answer immediately later on. So just be cautious around using linear access. If you have any experience with this, positive or negative, like feel free to pop it in the chat for the other people to see. And then what's also important is question layout. So you want to keep each question on a separate web page, because what that allows the student to do is as they complete each question, it will save their progress. If all the questions are on one page, there's a risk that their work may not be saved. So feedback, if we're thinking about sort of the assessment class test period, then you likely are not going to give students feedback immediately on submission of their test. So you keep it to no feedback will be displayed to the student. And you can always obviously decide to change that later on. Another important thing is to test your quiz beforehand. This could be for any errors in the actual questions or the answer options, and also your timing of the quiz. So our recommendation is to actually set up a dummy student account or guest account on your Vula site. And when you create your quiz, you create you make the assessment only available to your test or dummy account. That way you can do a proper test and see it as if a student would. If you use the preview function in test and quiz, it doesn't do 100% job of the student view, maybe only about 90%. So this is a really good practice that you could implement for a high stakes test. And then Lubabala, you can talk to this question. I know you did mention a little bit earlier, but what happens if there's an issue with a live quiz, and what happens if you edit that live quiz?
Right, thanks, Des. Yeah, so usually if you edit a published quiz or a live quiz, it's automatically retracted. So if there are students taking the quiz, it will be retracted, or they won't have access to it. Then you can make the changes, but you would also have to republish and regrade. Let's say you made an error in one question and you want to fix that. Then you can make the changes and then regrade republish and regrade. And in that process, you're also given the option to allow the students that were kicked out, to review their submission or to go back and make changes to respond to the changes that you've just made on your assessment. Yeah. Yeah.
Sam or Bubala, I don't know if you know answer Chris's question. He was asking if we don't adjust the date and time for the extra time students, does the test end at the fixed time for them as well? I would assume so.
I would highly recommend that you actually define the start and end dates for the exceptions, just to be on the safe side. I mean, I haven't tested this where you don't define the end date, but you just specify the time limit. But I think best practice is to also define the end date. The late submission or the late accept until date doesn't work on exceptions. So if you decide to complete that field, the late submissions accepted until date should match the due date. So if a test is going to be running for a window of 8 hours, but you're only going to give a student an hour, 20 minutes to complete this, then you can then have the start date and the end date in that defined to run for 8 hours, but set the time limit to, to an hour 20. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm just gonna try and finish up so we can get to the demo for the last 30 minutes.
Sure.
There's a question from Inga about how do you set it so that students can go to the question instead of scrolling through the order of questions? So actually, I don't have a screenshot of it now, but you'll see when he sets up the quiz, but they'll have a little menu bar on the right-hand side and they can go directly to the question that they want to complete. So they can just click question 2 or question 3, depending on that.
Yeah. If I can just also quickly jump in, Tess.
Yeah.
But also that is dependent on how you've laid out. So your layout is very important here. So if you've allowed them random access to questions, then they will have that table of contents. We call it the table of contents, where they can just jump to certain questions in the assessment. Whereas if it's linear, then you don't have that option of table of contents. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lubabalo. And then there's a question from Chris. What settings should be used so that students can access their mark solutions once everything has been graded by the markers? I think you could probably show that in the demo. I think, Chris, we can ask Lubabalo to show that to us in the demo. Just some other quick things before we hop onto the demo. When you have your quiz set up, think about who from your team will be on standby to answer any student queries that may come up during the test. Provide students with an email address or number to contact if they do have any issues. Also think about the time period your exam is open. If you're going to make your exam open till midnight, will someone be around at 11? If not, just let students know that, we will have someone on standby for any quiz queries or exam queries during 8 to 4 p.m., for example, just something to think about. Another thing to note is that if you have a large class, maybe more than 500 students, it's worth contacting Vula Help to think about how to optimize your setup for your test or exam. Often, if it's a really big class, then the decision is made to create a new Vula site specifically for that test or exam. Just another random tip, if you decide to do short answer questions in your test and quiz, you can use rubrics to mark those questions or mini essays. We have a rubric session next week, part of the webinar series, if you want to learn more about this, hosted by Shanali. Okay, so we're going to go hop over to the demo now. So Lubabala, I'm going to stop sharing. And he will take us through some stuff. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Tasnim. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Right. I hope everyone can see my screen.
All good, can see it.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I picked up in the chats that there's a big interest on setting up an assessment from scratch using the Mockup as opposed to using what we call the assessment builder. So I'm making an assumption that you already have the tool added here, but if you do not, if you do not have a tool added, you would just go to Site Setup, Manage Tools, and then find the Test and Quizzes tool from the list and select it, and just continue. So the tool list is alphabetical, so Test and Quiz would be at the bottom, and you would click Continue and follow the prompts, and then finish. So the tool will then be listed on the left-hand side here, on the left-hand side menu. I'll just quickly navigate to the tool. Right. So this is what you'll see. So by default, all your published assessments are listed on top, as you can see here, and all your draft versions. So a draft version is basically a working copy of the published assessment, as you can see here. So if I wanted to create an assessment from scratch, I'd go right there on top. I've got these tabs. One is assessments. This is where the assessment list is. The add tab, that's for adding assessments or creating assessments or importing assessments, i.e. if I exported an assessment from another site and I would like to reuse it on this site, I can import that file into this. So I can create an assessment from an import. Also question pools, that's where the list of question pools are listed. The event log, I'm just going through this just to give one an idea. The event log, this is where you're basically getting your assessment logs, and just gives you an idea when a student accessed a certain assessment and how much time they spent on it, and whether it was manually submitted or it was automatically submitted. So for an example, you'll notice my screen here for this assessment, Luabalo spent about 7 minutes completing it, but he actually ran out of time. So you'll see that it says timer submit. So the timer submit just means that Luabalo's work was submitted, but he didn't manually submit his work. So it was submitted on his behalf because he ran out of time. So this just gives us an indication. If it was a manual submit, then in brackets, you'll have user submit there, right? User activity report is similar to the logs, but it's just specifically for one student. If you want to see a list of the assessments completed by a certain student. And the trash, we've just introduced this tab. So if you've removed or deleted an assessment, it usually gets moved to the trash. I've noticed that people like deleting the drafts, the draft assessments. We don't advise you to do that, because once you remove the draft, if you want to reuse that assessment, you can't. Like if you want to export it, you can't, because there's no draft version. So if you've happened to remove the draft version of the assessment, you can always find it here under trash. I'm not sure if it stays forever under here, so it might maybe sit here for a good 60 days and then be permanently removed. I'm not entirely sure. But right, just moving along and adding an assessment. So in this case, we'll just add an assessment from scratch, create an assessment from scratch, but using the Mockup text. So I'll call this one, call it chicken noodle soup, and then I'll then select that I want to create this using the Mockup. So the Mockup option comes handy if, for instance, you already have a question paper somewhere with all the questions listed. So you can copy and paste. So it allows us to copy and paste. But the Mockup also supports a few question types. As you can see here on my right-hand side, it supports your MCQs, your MCQs, your fill in the blank, your short essay type question, your true and false, and your fill in numeric responses. So if, for instance, I wanted to know what's the required or the accepted markup for single correct multiple choice, I can click on that link and it will give me an idea of how the question should be added there. So I have some questions that I've listed. In my case, I'm using Notepad. So I've got these questions on Notepad. Just copy and paste. So you're probably not seeing my Notepad screen now. So I'll have these questions, I'll copy and paste them. You can also copy the questions from a Word document, so you don't need to be copying from Notepad. But the nice thing about Notepad is that it makes the text plain text, so it removes any kind of formatting on it. So this is what I'll have. So if one of my question has an image, the question, the markup option doesn't have that option for us to actually add the image. So you would just create the questions, and then once you've created the questions, then you can then revise a certain question and add the attached image or make changes to it. And just use this also as another example, add it onto my list here. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I just, the reason why I'm adding this one is just to explain a few things here. So with this example, you'll notice here that the question is, so you'll have the first line is the question number, question 4, and it's worth how many points. So in this case, let's say it's worth 10 points. So I'll just type in it's worth 10 points in brackets. And then the next line, I'll then have the question. And on a new line, I'll then start adding my options there. So as you can see, A, B, C, D, E, the correct one will be marked with an asterisk there. So in this case, the correct one in this case is A. If I would like to randomize my answers, so I'll just add here randomize, hashtag randomize. So what that tells the system is that randomize the answers. So randomizing answers is a good practice also, so that if students are sharing, or sitting next to each other, they don't see the same answer option. So we know that the correct answer is Washington, but it could be D, it could be, so it will be shuffled around, but the correct answer remains being Washington. If you require rationale for this option, so a student chooses, makes a choice and then provides a rationale why they chose A, then you then add it here as hashtag rationale. So let's say we have all our questions added now and we're happy with them, and I'll just click next. And once I've clicked next, it takes me to this screen where it provides me with a summary of all the questions that I've added. So this table, you'll see that that's the question I added. It's a multiple choice question and it's worth that much, and the correct answer is that, and so on, as you can see here. And if I'm happy with this, if I picked up that I've made an error, then I can move back. So I can click back and make rectify, then continue again. So there are two options at the bottom here, whether I want to create an assessment or I want to create a question pool. So if I wanted to create a question pool, then I'll be prompted to create a question pool, and all these questions will just sit in a question pool. But if I want to create an assessment using these questions, I'll just click create assessment, and there. So the assessment will then, I'll be taken to this page, and my chicken noodle soup assessment will be listed there under drafts there. So if I would like to make changes to a question, maybe, let's say, I'll make an example. Let's say for argument's sake, I want to add an image on question 2. I want to add an image here because I couldn't add it initially with the markup option. So I'll just access question 2 from the quiz and edit in line with question 2. I'll just click edit, and I'll then make my changes here. If I want to add negative marking, or if I want to change the score here and so on, so I can make those changes. But my main goal is to add an attachment or to add an image. So as Taz mentioned earlier on, that we usually recommend that if you're using images as part of your questions, it's better to just attach that image. The nice thing about it is that it auto loads, so the student doesn't need to click on the image for it to appear. So when the question loads, the image is already open. So I'm not sure if I have any images to use here. Boom, 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 boom. Right. Let's go for that one. Select the image. It's there. There's the image listed. Then I'll continue and save changes. If I also want to make more changes here, i.e., I want to have this question randomized, I can just do that. Yes, because I didn't specify it when I was doing the markup, and I'll click save, and it will take me to this page. So this is how it's going to appear. Then there's the attachment. But if I were to preview this, the image would auto load. I don't know if we have enough time, but I'll just quickly do the preview. So a preview just gives you an idea of how the student just will view, or this will appear to the student. So there was a question about how you get students to jump to certain questions, So in this case, this assessment has 4 questions, and I'm on question 1 of 4. There's this option here, question progress, or we also call the table of contents. So a student can see which question that they've answered and which one they haven't answered. And they can also jump to a certain question. So if I want to jump to question 2, I'll select there on the list, and it will just move me to that question. And I'll then be taken to question 2. Now, question 2 is the one that I just attached the image. So this is the attached image. So that's a question on top there, and the image appears below here. The options are right below, and I can just make a selection and click next. So the nice thing of having a single question per page is that when you click next, my answer or my response is automatically saved. So if I were to run out of time, when the assessment gets submitted, all my saved responses will be captured and recorded on the system. Right. I'll just exit. So yeah, any questions?
No, it's
question?
quiet. It's quiet in the chats. I'm hoping. Wait, I see there's one question.
Okay.
If clicking next automatically saves, what is the purpose of the save button?
Right. The save button we would recommend, especially when you're using essay type questions, you click the save button. So essay type questions, that's where someone would type in their response and then click save. So it saves the entry. But with most of the auto-graded questions, you just make a selection and click next. You don't necessarily need to click save, so it automatically saves it. But with questions where you either need to fill in, like type in an entry and or the essay type or fill in the missing word, we recommend that you click save. Yeah.
Cool. And there's another question. Can you control the size of the graph? So if you add an attachment, are you able to resize it after, or you should probably resize it before you add the attachment?
Yeah, in an attachment case, you would have to manipulate it prior to uploading it. If it was in text, so if the image was in text, in the text area, then you can manipulate it there. You can squeeze it like how you would do it on a Word document. But when it's attached, you either have to get a smaller version of it. Yeah.
Sorry, there's another question that I missed. Just 1 second. I need to make this window open bigger. For question pool, can we have... So, Patricia, the question pool session we're going to have next week, Tuesday, because it can get quite complicated. But we'll answer your question quickly. Can we have, for example, 5 categories and we'll select 2 questions from each category? Yes, you can do that. So you can set up 5 question pools and tell the quiz to take 2 questions from each of those categories.
Yeah.
So definitely come to that session.
Yeah. And if it's quite urgent, you can just book a consultation with us. I think, Taz, you can share the link with everyone.
Yeah, we'll do.
And then we can, have a one-on-one consultation and go through the setting up of an assessment using question pools. Yeah.
We've also added a drop-in at any time on, I think, Friday afternoons. Yeah. Taz also has the details of that. So if you don't want to wait to book us, or if you just want to just drop into our office, that's another
Thanks,
option.
Sam.
Thank you. Right. So I'm done setting up the assessment. So I would like to release this assessment. I want to publish it. So I would go to the assessment, either go actions, edit, or I'll just actions, click publish. You'll notice there that when you're about to publish, this is what you're going to get. This is what it gives you. But something comes up. I haven't worked on the settings here. So I don't know when this assessment is opening and when is it closing. So I then need to then visit my settings. So then before I publish, I need to edit my settings. So with settings, this is where I get to decide how many times the students get to take this assessment. And also, if I want to maybe give this assessment a different title, I can just make the changes there under this, about this assessment. And if I've got general instructions for the students, then I can add them in this section under description. And for the honor pledge, so honor pledge works like when students are about to begin the assessment, if they do not acknowledge the honor pledge, they will not be able to begin the assessment. So they will be given a checkbox to select before they can start the assessment. And then another important part, which Taz touched based on, is the availability and submission. So who gets to take this assessment? Is it meant for everyone in my class, or is it meant for selected groups? So I can create an assessment, but only for a certain few students. So I can then select the groups. Of course, I will not have this option of selecting groups if I have not created groups in advance. So I would have to set up my groups via site setup, add up groups, and create new groups there and add students into those groups. Then I can then, in this part, assign it to those groups. So in this case, I'll just say an entire site, so that means everyone on the site. And I can specify how many times the students take this assessment. Unlimited, meaning as many times as they want, or I can say 1 here, and set the start date. I could just use today's date, and I could here specify the time that it opens at 1600. So I will use the sliders, or just use the plus and minus signs in line with hour and minute, and click done. Sorry, this is blocking my view there. Click done, so it will record the time, and same applies here for my end date. It closes on Saturday, and I can define what time on Saturday, and I'll click done also. Then if it's a timed assessment, then I would have to select here that it's a timed assessment, and I will give a student an hour to complete this. So I'll specify it here, and I won't have late submissions. So I'll just no late submissions. So students can take it between this 21st and the 24th, and they can take it anytime between the 21st and the 24th for an hour. So when they start, the clock starts counting down, and they would have an hour to complete it. Auto submit, as Taz has mentioned earlier on, the auto submit submits all the students' saved work, and it also works this way. It kicks in after the latest submission date. So if I had like this, for instance, and also what it does, it's meant to clear the list of those students that we call them the hanging sessions or the hanging students that would appear in progress even though the assessment is closed already. So whenever you see on your assessments that it is closed already, but you're still seeing students that are in progress. So you could just go to your settings, the assessment settings, and then just switch on auto submit and then save the settings. Then it will run, usually it runs at midnight on the day. So if I do it retrospectively today or on the 24th, it will only run at midnight on the 24th. If you want to receive email notifications when students make a submission, then you can switch it on. By default, it's off here. I'll jump these options on, or you want to show scores, you can select that so they can see how much a question is worth. I'll jump these 2 options because they don't really apply in our current teaching and learning context. So basically setting IP range and passwords and switching on responders lockdown browser. So I won't really explain this, I'll jump them. Another important part was this one where you've got extra time students. So usually students, when others are getting an hour, a certain group of students would, or a certain student would get an hour, maybe 15 minutes. So you can add an exception, select them from the drop down, and set the availability date. So the availability is the same window as everyone. So I think I said it's going to start at, I can't remember my start date above. Yeah, let's just say that, and then set. So I don't have, it's optional to set the time limit. So if it's a timed assessment, I would have to set the time limit. But if it's not, I can leave it open, leave it undefined. Yeah, I'll give them 10 minutes extra. And I don't need to set the late submissions. I can leave it blank. And to save this, I'll just add exception, and it will then be listed. Exceptions can also be set up for groups. I didn't mention that, but you can also set up an exception for groups. So if you've got maybe 3 different groups of students that get different times, you can then select the group instead of selecting a student. And there was a question about feedback. So by default, when it comes to the grading and feedback, the assessment records the highest score. So this, so if a student takes it multiple times, let's say they were allowed to take it 2 times or 3 times or unlimited. So by default, the system will take the highest score that the student got. Usually for assessments that are not auto-graded, the highest score actually becomes the latest submission or the last submission that the student made. So when you're viewing the student scores, good practice is, instead of, you can change the filter from highest score or to highest submission to all submissions, so that you can see the most recent submission or the correct submission. Yeah. If you want to send scores to the gradebook, you can just enable this. You don't have to create a gradebook item, so you can just select this. It will automatically send the score to the gradebook. Right, in terms of feedback, here you've got 2 types of feedback, question level feedback and also selection level feedback. So you can provide at a level feedback at a level, a question level or at an option level. So A, B, C, D. So if student chose C and they got it wrong, then you provide this feedback kind of thing. So that's an option here. So by default, it selects both. And you can choose here the type of feedback. So feedback on submission, that's when they submit, then they would get feedback. After submission, they would get feedback. There's also an option for advanced feedback. So here, you could either say, no, only release student assessment scores. That's it, boom. Or if you want to provide students with more feedback, maybe you had comments and so on made in their assessments, then you can then select the option release questions in the following. So I would release the student response, so how they responded to the question. The correct response, I don't want to release that because maybe I don't want them to know the correct answers. I mean, give them the memo kind of thing. So I would share my comments with them. I would share the scores. So I would select those options. So here it will release the question and how the student responded to the question, my comments on certain questions, and also the scores, be it for parts and so on. And the last part is, yeah.
Before you move on grading. So if this was like a test or exam scenario, people will likely have no feedback to be released, right? On submission of the quiz, right? So they'd have no feedback. But now say that the tutors or the academics have marked and graded everyone, and now they want to release it after the assessment has been complete. How would they do that?
So they want to release the feedback afterwards.
Yeah, later on, once it's been marked.
Right. So you could still, let's say initially it was no feedback, so you can revisit the settings of the published assessment and then just click on you could just select immediate feedback. It's fine, it will still work. So you won't have to select feedback on submission. Immediate feedback would also work, and then save settings.
Basically, once you're done with your quiz and it's on the option of no feedback, and all the tutors and everyone has marked, you can go back into the settings of your quiz and change the feedback option and republish. Is that correct?
Yes.
Chris, does that answer your question, or do you want to ask anything else?
No, you just save the settings, yeah. Or if you know when your feedback.
Finish.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris?
Sure, go ahead, Chris.
I mean, my comments, I think Lubumbalo and I went through this last week trying to do exactly this, and the going back and undoing it, if you've given students extra time, it then totally kind of locks up the system, and you can't go back and release and change these settings.
Thanks for bringing that one up, Chris. I think it's you're not the first person that's mentioning this, and I think it's more of becoming more of a bug. It's misbehaving. Previously, it didn't behave that way, so it would work. So now, what Chris is talking about is it would pick up that it would be unhappy with the exceptions. If you have exceptions set, it will be unhappy with the exceptions and say no, the exceptions can't be in the past date. And this is something new, but I'm noticing that a lot of people are starting to experience it. A workaround,
The workaround bites though, because we used the workaround and then I had students go back in and try and retake a test from a month and a half ago.
Okay, I'm happy to take it offline and we go through it together, Chris.
Before you continue, I guess wouldn't another option just be maybe creating and duplicating the quiz for a specific group of people? But thank you. Sam's in the chat saying we are now escalating the issue. We have another question from Claire on in the chat. If you set it to release questions, sorry, I'm just trying to understand this quickly. Claire, do you want to ask your question out loud by any chance? Oh yeah, if you select release questions and the following, go for it.
If you, sorry, thank you. If you select, as you have on the screen now, release questions and the following, you put a dot in that box and you don't tick any of those things underneath, does it auto select all of them or does it auto select none of them?
That's a good question. I've never, I won't lie to you. I have never tested it, but I think it would require you to actually define it. Let me just see.
And the default for that is the other block, isn't it? It's the only release later.
The default would be this one, or you're referring on top here?
The default is the top one, isn't it? Yeah. So okay. So if you tick the bottom, if you select the bottom one, you just have to remember to put something in the boxes. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Cool.
And right, I think Taz already touched base on this. So by default, your layout and appearances would be random access. I know some courses, they have linear access where students must just answer, move forward, and they can't revisit the previous response. I know at health sciences, some courses, they do that. And each question on a web page, and when I'm happy with this, I'll just save settings and publish. If I'm not ready to publish it, I'll just save the settings and then I can come later and publish it. And if I want to publish without a notification, I'll then state it here without, and also add the due date on the calendar here and publish. That's all from my side. Back to studio.
Thanks, everyone. I hope that helped you think about the considerations for your test or quiz. Finally, you're able to do that. On Fridays, we've started dropping office hours. So we have a Zoom room link and you can pop in with any of your issues. So you can try that out on Friday. We also have a SALT resource on time test. And then there's just obviously a help resources on Vula help in the left-hand tab. And there's another link to an alternative help resource for Vula. That's it for today. I hope that helped. And if you have any further questions, help at Vula is your guy or girl.